when I wrote this slide, I hadn't seen the presentations this afternoon. It's now completely redundant, the first bit of that, because at the end of the day, if you don't believe that it works after all of this, then you haven't been listening to the same things that I've been listening to. I have to say, for and Gareth and I, this afternoon was quite an emotional experience, really, because of course our big involvement in this was early on, and the big challenge was, you know, once we were involved, etc., for the guys to take it on, and what an absolutely stunning job they've done, all of them, in different ways. And I think that the important bit with this, which I touched on before, is people aren't doing this. This is very new. You know, there are other meetings like this in rooms discussing stuff like this. It just doesn't happen. You know, place branding is still very much in its infancy. Understanding what it can achieve is very much in its infancy. So I think what's been achieved and what you've seen is absolutely fantastic. As I say, brought a tear to the eye of an old place brander, you know. The interesting bit, I think, for all of us is we learnt as we went along. As Carolyn said, no one had really done this before. We certainly hadn't done it before in this way of trying to mentor and work with people. So there was quite a challenge. And flexing an approach for different places, again, also quite a challenge. So what I want to do in this is try and look at what we've learned, what were the successes. Obviously not everything worked, you know, so we don't want to, you know, put rose-tinted glasses on here. Some bits did not work. Some bits were very challenging. Some bits ended in teary conversations, you know, etc. There's been plenty of, you know, shoulders to cry on, and that included mine, and Gareth's, you know. So it's been interesting as we've gone along. So, let's have a think about the successes. The first thing it's done is it gets people to think about and focus on the place, and you might think that's blindingly obvious. It isn't blindingly obvious, because most people are busy. They're on with running their own organisations, busy day jobs, whether that's in business, even within councils, where obviously the local authority has a place leadership role. People have day jobs. They're not thinking about the big picture of place. So this gets people to really, really focus on it and get excited about it, interested in it, and also helps them think about the leadership of place. And, you know, the leadership of place is not about the local authority. If it ever was, fine. It certainly never can be now, because we are in a time of austerity. And in a time of austerity, the tide has gone out on public sector finances, and it won't be coming back in anything like the same way. So if we carry on doing things the same old, we're not going to get very good results. So it's about very much thinking about how the leadership of place works and doing things very differently. What's been surprising when we've done it is, of course, people rediscover their place. Now, when we walked around these places, and it happens everywhere, and took lots of photos, when we came back to some of the steering groups, they didn't actually know where some of the bits were we'd photographed. Because you forget, you know, your own place. You forget what you've got. You forget how lucky you are. You forget your assets. You forget what's 5 miles down the road, which still counts as you. So that's very important. The big bit, if we go back to the Einstein quote, was it's about people doing things differently, and boy, have you seen some examples of that from all 4 places, about them doing things differently. So what this has stimulated is a change in attitude, a change in approach. It hasn't stimulated spending loads and loads of money, because there isn't loads of money anymore. And it's created momentum. So it's built momentum, whether that's in a thigh with events and etc. All sorts of things. People have got up ahead of steam about the place. The other thing as well is this whole notion of making things simple. Usually what happens with places, and the reason there isn't change, is it just looks too big, too difficult, too impossible, too many stakeholders. You know? Actually, and you've seen it now throughout today, it's actually very doable if you have the right methodology And if you don't try and take on too much, do a few things very well, and it is very, very deliverable. So that whole idea of making it simple is important. And it's ended up with places having a very different view at times of what their priorities are. So those are some of the big successes, and certainly one of the big successes within that is the whole idea of bringing people together. And what we talk about a lot is that the journey is almost as important as the end result. So getting the steering group together and them living through it all, evolving into some sort of place board or whatever, is actually as important as creating visual language, taking new imagery, developing websites, etc. Because you've brought people together to think about the place differently, to do things differently together. And you've seen examples of that this afternoon. So I wanted to break down the learning into some different chunks. So the first one is thinking about the general sort of management and governance of this. The first thing, and I'm sure the project officers will probably agree with this, it's a bloody massive job. Right? It's very challenging, very challenging. You are put in a position of all of a sudden being one of one, with yes, some support, trying to look at the direction of a place, a new place story. That is a massive, massive ask. So it is a really big thing to do. So breaking it down and making sure the right support mechanisms are there is really important. Mentoring and coaching, I think, are needed. For Angarad and I, we do this all the time. So it's a bit easier for us. For the project officers and even for the lead players in the councils, this is new, as Carolyn said. No one had done this before, and the local authorities hadn't done it before, so there wasn't any experience or expertise. So to expect the poor project officers to just take this up and run with it was probably a pretty big ask. So I think, and it doesn't matter who it's from, some coaching, some mentoring, some just being there at the end of a phone to say, I really wouldn't do that or I would do that, is very, very important. If you look at the skill sets, and some of these skill sets evolved in the project officers, it's very much, communication is vital. And you saw it, what 4 great presentations that we saw this afternoon. These guys can communicate, they can sell stuff, they can sell ideas, and that's important. You've got to be able to manage projects, because at the end of the day, you're probably running loads of different initiatives all at once. You've got to be able to influence other people to do stuff that they don't want to do, that they don't understand, that they don't think's relevant to them. And you've got to sit in meetings, then you've got to come away having been told, no, I'm not going to do it, and think of a new approach and go back again and try again. Because most of this is about creating a framework for change that then other people have to deliver for you. So it's quite hard. And the other bit as well is that, as you've probably seen, there is a camaraderie amongst the project officers that is actually, one didn't know that was going to happen. It has. I would say that's very important, because it's quite lonely doing this, because you don't fit. You're a bit odd. You're doing stuff to do with the place, in the place, but you don't totally work for the local authority. You've got freedom to operate, which some people are envious of. You've got some money to spend, which some people then want to spend for you in ways that wasn't meant to happen. So being able to speak to others and get ideas, and say, what shall I do? What's worked with you? Is very important. They've done lots of that. So even if you're going to do it in your place and it's a one-off, then trying to find some others to talk to in other places, I would say, would be very valuable. The private sector are critical in this, and therefore having a steering group to oversee the work, vital, because it's really important that from the off, it isn't just seen as the local authority. Mainly because in most places, people have had the t-shirt, watched the film, often 7 times, it might not have worked, there's more cynicism than you can shake a cat at, etc. So it's very important that the private sector are involved, because they understand all of this as well, because this is their world. It's about branding, it's about promoting, it's trying to sell things, etc. They understand all of that, and they'll get infused about it. So getting them involved, important. However, the local authority has to be involved at a very senior level. And as Carolyn alluded to, that happened. It could have happened better along the way. It might have made things easier, and those are the things that you learn. Because when we try and do these things directly, we try all the time to deal with the chief exec straight away from the off, because otherwise it's quite challenging sometimes to get things through. For the project officers, again, having admin and finance support on this is very important, because otherwise you spend a whole lot of time doing that instead of getting out and talking to people and making it happen. The next bit's pretty critical. You've got to be enthusing. You've got to inspire people. You've got to excite them. You know, so again, if they didn't know they were walking into that, that's what it's about. You know, Gary and I spend a lot of time going to places to try and get them excited about their own place, because they've lost some of that along the way. So and that's another key role. But managing expectations, this is not a silver bullet. It will not answer everything. It will not do everything. So again, it's important that people understand from the start what is deliverable. So thinking about the approach, the first bit is it's not about the local authority, this. And I'm not trying to get at local authorities here, because they're absolutely pivotal. But it's about a place-led change programme, a place-led approach. Not, you know, it's not about the local authority or any one organisation. As Carolyn alluded to, the term brand can be really misconstrued. And again, I guess if we'd have been there before you started, we'd have probably said, although it worked really nicely, I wouldn't have used the term. Because we tend not to use the term in places, simply because to a lot of people, it means ponytailed marketeers, of which you can see I'm not, right? Spending loads of money, right? Achieving very little in a short-term load of campaigns, right? And it is not about that, and hopefully you've seen that today. So again, it's about a new story for the place. It's not about that. And the other thing is, this isn't a project. Now, of course, it is a project, but at the end of the day, this has got to work now going forward. So it's a long-term, you know, strategic intervention in the place. So part of the problem, again, was people viewing it as a project with an end. So almost like, we're going to do this brand project, then it's going to finish, and we're going to go do something else. Well, this is about the place. The place ain't going to disappear. They need to promote the place isn't going to disappear. So you've got to get your head around that, I think. The expression bit, the visual language, the images, the messaging wasn't originally within the brief and came within the brief, but it's massively important, as you've seen. You know, taking that story and that thinking and being able to translate it into things you can see and touch is absolutely pivotal. And it's really exciting to see the way that's been brought to life. And this is more than marketing. It's not just about marketing and comms. However important that is, and it is important, it's not just that. You've seen all sorts of examples of changing behaviours, changing experience of place, you know, and it ain't a funding pot. How many times did we have the project officers on saying, such and such wants to do this, right, do you think it fits? And it was completely irrelevant. It was just someone after some money, you know, so that happens. The other bit with this is don't launch it. Launching these things is usually a disaster, right? Because what happens is the media roll along, they look at the visual language, they don't understand it, they think it's a logo, and you get headlines in the paper, council, EU, whatever, spends 50 grand on logo. The next day you get 5,000 letters to the paper wanting to sack everybody possible, right? So that's a really bad idea. Softly, just let it roll out there, let it start to change things and approaches. Momentum and pace is really important. I remember the first meeting when we all sat down together and we gave a view of what we felt the timeline was, which was probably about half as fast, right? No, twice as fast, sorry, as the original view was. And Vess will remember that entertaining conversation when he told me I was insane, right? And there was no way it was going to happen. And even if we could do it and were stupid enough to try between two countries across 4 places all at once in a really fast period of time, it wasn't going to work in the places. Well, it did work. It was the right thing to do it. You need a lot of momentum early on. You've got to get people excited, interested at meetings, understanding what the place is about. about coming up with ideas, so that bit's important. As is the bit of getting from the strategy and the thinking and the story to delivering stuff. Because people want to see stuff, they want to see change, they want to see some banners up. So the communications bit tends to come in early because you can do that fast. You know, so quick wins are very, very important, so people get a view of momentum and that things are happening differently. So, what about implementation? Well, first of all, it's about doing things differently, you know, and you've seen all of that. It's lots and lots to do with that. It's not about spending stuff. And some of the time it's about pulling people together and spending other people's budgets as part of the process, because it's all about the place. One of the things that all the guys have got involved with is creating what I guess we've called a place plan, which is about really looking at all of the things that are happening in the place over a 2 or 3 year period. When I say all the things, so what are the big interventions and projects that are happening? Because in your place there will be lots. There will be events, there will be new buildings going up, there will be schools initiatives, there will be a whole host of stuff already happening, either public sector or private sector. If you sort of chart that within this plan, you can look at how to bend that activity, tweak it, make it work within the story. Sometimes that might be using the graphic language, sometimes it's a different set of messages. You know, sometimes it's an awards that's happening where they use the photography behind it, that they use bits of the story in the introduction. So there's a lot you can do, and none of that costs any money. It's about bending things that are already there, and that's the big power of this sort of work. As is creating exemplars. You need some stuff in each bit of the quadrant. If you remember, I showed you the different bit about product, communications, etc. You need to show different examples of that so that people can copy it, so that as much they know what is wrong as what is right. So you can point to some things and say, that's what this website should look like. If we're doing e-activity, it should look like this. If we're trying to influence the public realm, it should be like this. So you need some exemplars that clearly are correct. And finally, on implementation, you've got to cascade out, you've got to engage, and it's about influencing people, not policing, because in a place, nobody owns the place. The local authority doesn't own the place, everybody owns it. Everybody's got a part to play, so you've got to try and persuade people, not tell them what to do. And again, that calls for different skills. And it can take quite a while to deliver all of this at a local level, you know, if it's just being delivered locally. So one of the things that was always talked about, and it's been touched on, is sustainability. So if it starts as a project, right, and this was a project, it needs an exit strategy. And the exit strategy doesn't mean you stop. The exit strategy is what on earth do you do to keep it going, right? Because if you believe in it and you believe in your place, you've got to sustain it. And you've heard various ideas about place boards and etc. And what the places have tried to do, and it happens elsewhere, is they've linked this ongoing idea of governance and management to initiatives in the place, to the local authority, to whatever. And quite excitingly, this provides a new model for place leadership. For doing things differently in a place, for the private sector having a different role with the public sector, for the public sector letting go a bit because they haven't got the resources anymore to do it. Building capacity and transferring knowledge is absolutely vital. So if you take this project, our role is advisory, mentors, coaches, whatever. All of it was built around, could we transfer knowledge to the project officers to enable them to do this? And the answer was, well, you've seen the answer, was yes. It was challenging at times for them, for us, because they're trying to learn from us very quickly in terms of what to do, and that's a key bit of it. The private sector role, I can't overemphasise enough that going forward they've got to have a key engagement role, they've got to have a key leadership role, because otherwise it won't work. But the local authority have got to be a champion at the most senior level you can get, because it's about the place. And the people and the organisations have got to step up. You know, they've got to do things differently. They might have to provide a bit of money. You know, they might have to provide shops like we've seen. They might have to provide free advice. It's about them challenging themselves to do things differently within this overall context. The other bit that I guess that we've learned is that you create a coalition of the willing. So lots of people have got involved in these places that you've seen, who weren't before, who are doing fantastic things, who don't have to do it, and that's brilliant, and that's very powerful. The other bit I think that we miss on this, and is a massive learning point, is if you look, and we look at this afternoon, is that you develop people who can do a fantastic job for the place. I look back to that room 3 years ago with some project officers that probably were wondering what on earth they'd let themselves in for after we'd had a whole day with them. And I look again today as Angard and I did, and boy were we proud. Yeah? They have done a fantastic job. This will not have happened without them. And they are now a resource of absolute value for those places. Some of them have moved on to new jobs, and that's because they're valued. But they have grown as individuals because of this process, which is a power in itself. So that wasn't we didn't set out with that, I don't think, but that's what's happened. So I would just say, Elaine and now Joe and Fliss, Lisa, Patricia, you have done an absolutely brilliant job. Brilliant job. So, what's possible then? So, just to chuck a few things here very quickly at what other places have done. So, how does this stuff, it can influence strategy and thinking. So, basically, you're using this, of course, like we've shown you before, to change all of that. So, what can it do? So, here we have in Wigan. So, we've got a new economic framework in Wigan, totally based on the story. New priorities, developed by business as part of developing the story. In Rochdale, we've got a master plan for the town centre, totally rewritten based on the story and the priorities for the place. As you move into communications, here you've got Rochdale's regeneration booklet. What do you get with communication? It all starts to look and feel coherent, like it's coming from the same place, as here with Northern Ireland's sort of printed literature and its own story that follows through. All the way through to TV adverts. So how's the story changing this? Well, if this TV ad had been done 5 years ago, I can absolutely categorically guarantee it would have ended in a pub with a pint of Guinness, absolutely defo, right? This time, because they had a new story about confidently moving on, it ended up in a trendy restaurant on the North Coast with this guy proposing, finally being accepted by his girlfriend. A series of stories coming from the main story. And then into websites, so we've seen one today. This is Rochdale's, their big idea, it's all about growing space. And I'm not going to explain it, but when you look at that design, you can see how the story influences the end product, as does the importance of involving the media. Everybody moans about the media, and everybody will. And every local authority will always be unhappy with the media, because that's the nature of the beast. But get them inside the tent, right? They're far better inside the tent than outside the tent. That's all I would say. And as you look at environment then, so you can change public realm. These are physical things now. So these are stories of the ships on Belfast Harbour coming out of the story for Northern Ireland. And here we see some more benches. In this case, we're in Derry. So we're telling the story of Derry, little stories of Derry on these benches. So that goes from being a granite bench to being the only bench in the world that could possibly sit in Derry. Because at the end of the day, it's got the Derry, Londonderry story. And then all the way through to things like wayfinding. So when you look at things like St Patrick's Trail, it takes on the view of what's the story all about, and it translates that into the general environment, and you get something that's very bespoke to place because it comes out the thinking, out of that story. And your benches, our creative director, he gets absolutely passionate about benches and bins. He's a sad lad. But at the end of the day, benches and bins can change your place. They don't have to be boring. You don't have to spend loads of money on them. Look at these here across Downpatrick. And then into things like, we can't work with the rail company. Well, you can. This is Rochdale Railway Station. We've made it different, Costs virtually nothing with vinyls. And then all the way through to the airport here at Derry, Londonderry, changing physical infrastructure in terms of its feel. And you can change the way things are designed. This is on the waterfront at Hull, and that building was the first spec office development for 20 years in Hull. And look at the quality of the public realm, look at the lighting, all of that was driven by the brand strategy. And that building was across from this one, which is the Deep, which is Hull's Millennium Project, the most successful one apart from Eden. Right? And when that was first designed, it looked like an upturned concrete colander. It was bloody awful. Right? So they sacked the architect, they got in a little lad called Terry Farrell, who is now Sir Terry Farrell, and does stuff around the world, right? And a large part of that Sir was due to that building. And changing behaviour is one of the hardest bits. So you use sport. So here you've got the captains of the 2 rugby teams in Hull, and you've got the captain of the football team doing something with young people, because young people will not listen to anybody, they might listen to sports and music people, and that's changing behaviour. As is, doing things with the community on awards. So in Hull here, this is Hull's Community Pioneer Awards, which we invented based on the brand. Nobody knew it had anything to do with the brand. Year 1, we had 80 people at it. Year 2, it was the biggest event in Hull. We had to do it in a cinema because we had so many people who wanted to take part. And that was created by the brand. And this is selling Hull to the business community in London and the South East. Did we do it? Did the council do it? No. All those people there are private sector, university, Hull Truck Theatre. They went to sell Hull, right, to people in London because it was their story. So there's an awful lot of things you can do with this. I just wanted to leave you with what I would call some trends that are big, right, in terms of the world of place that we see now. First one, place leadership. So everybody has to get real now. Local authorities are very challenged in what they can deliver. The private sector doing things differently and things like place boards will be absolutely the norm. And if that's not happening in your place, you need to look at it, because at the end of the day, it will be happening everywhere. And the private sector will be playing a much bigger role. They won't just sat there as a quiet partner. They'll be doing stuff, getting on with stuff as a bigger player. So the private sector's role as a contributor and a deliverer will be bigger. If you think about one of the biggest challenges now is growth. How do you stimulate growth in places? You've seen some examples today of how that story can be used to change an economy, to do things differently, to create jobs. Right? So the idea of a story, a narrative of place as a driver for change, as a way of developing growth, right, at the heart of what the economy is pretty pivotal. So that place narrative now, very important. It's interesting in England, we've got a thing called city deals at the moment now, which are in the big cities. And if you look at what government are saying to those cities, they are saying to them, not what are your projects, they're saying, what's your narrative? What's your narrative of place? Where's it going? How does it all fit? How does the private sector fit? So it's important, as is linking to planning and development. All development is challenging at the moment because it's tough, as you know. So if you can make it easy for developers by letting them fit within a story that's there, fit within your priorities, do development that helps develop the place that's already been decided on through that story, it makes it easier through planning, easier to get community on board, easier to do business. And finally, ambassadors. Ambassadors have been touched on. So yes, partly the role of the private sector. If you've got the story, if you can get people involved, you will also find that they will financially contribute. So we have schemes in different places. We've just launched one in Coventry called the Champions Scheme. In 2 weeks, they got £45,000, right, in terms of business contribution to being ambassadors and signing up to support the activity. And they got equally the same amount of in-kind support. So developing ambassadors and all of those sort of things, very, very powerful, and a big thing that's happening to fill some of the gaps that there are at the moment. So I guess for us, it's been a pretty exciting journey. It's been a learning journey. As I say, you have done things in these 4 towns that have not happened anywhere else before. It's a tremendous tribute to the project and the foresight of the people who put it together that it's been able to do what it can do. And my great congratulations. I just urge the places to keep all of this going. After brand, it will be just as important, if not more so. Thanks very much.